1 year after the heartbreak and betrayal, just when I thought I'd moved on, I received a call from the last person I expected to hear from, my ex-wife, Maya. After everything she put me through, she wanted to reconcile. This video will take you through the unraveling of our perfect marriage, the hidden secrets, the lies, and how even the deepest trust can shatter. And now, with her asking to start over, I'm faced with a decision I never thought I'd have to make. Tune in for a story of love, betrayal, and the strength it takes to rebuild a life after heartbreak.
Eric. Hi.
Maya. Hi. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost picture her gathering her thoughts, trying to find the right words.
I know this is unexpected. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I've had a lot of time to think, and I realize what I lost.
She sighed, and her voice cracked just a bit.
I miss you, Eric. I'd like to see you again. Maybe we could start over?
Her words hung in the air, stirring something deep, something I thought I'd buried. Start over. I let the words settle, feeling the weight of them. She was asking to undo the past, to go back to the days before betrayal and lies. But how could she not remember? How could she think I'd forgotten what had happened, how it all fell apart? Her voice faded as I drifted back, replaying the memories that had brought us to where we were now. The doubt, the secrets, the lies, it all came rushing back, vivid and unrelenting. And as I sat there, still holding the phone, it all began to unfold again, the story of how everything between us unraveled, piece by painful piece. My name's Eric Holden, and if you'd met me a year ago, you'd probably think I was the guy who had it all together. At 36, I was living the life I thought I'd worked hard to earn. My wife, Maya, and I had been married nearly 9 years. We both worked at Sentinel Holdings, a major consulting firm in downtown Chicago. I led the monitoring department, overseeing projects and managing the deadlines that kept Sentinel's reputation spotless, while Maya ran the marketing team, handling clients and leading presentations that left even the toughest execs impressed. We were that couple, you know? The ones who people say are destined for great things. We had the whole setup. Our apartment in the heart of the city had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the skyline. On weekends, we have dinner at some new restaurant or unlined with drinks overlooking the river. There were the occasional weekend trips, whenever we could spare the time. Napa Valley, the Hamptons, skiing in Colorado. It was the kind of lifestyle people looked up to. If you asked anyone at Sentinel, they'd say we were the perfect pair. A power couple. Our colleagues would even tease us sometimes, saying that if Maya and I were in the room, the project was already a success. But I guess they didn't know us as well as they thought. If I'm honest, I thought I knew us, too. I figured that if there were problems, we'd talk them out and move forward together. Life felt solid, like we were on the same page and headed in the same direction. We shared the same vision, or so I thought. But it turns out that while I was busy working and trusting her, things were happening under the surface, things I hadn't even begun to see. It's funny how life can blindside you like that. One day, you're confident in the path you're on, and the next, you're left wondering if any of it was ever real. The signs were small at first, almost too small to catch. We'd be talking over dinner, and I'd bring up some upcoming plans, like finally taking that weekend trip to Door County we'd been putting off. Maya would give me a distracted maybe, then quickly change the subject. She'd been staying later at work, saying it was because of the Madison project. Richard wants us to redo the whole pitch, she'd say. He thinks we're missing the wow factor. Now, anyone who knows Richard, our CEO, knows he's picky. He's the type who'll scrap an entire campaign because a font is too bold or a color is too soft. The man lives for the tiniest details and expects everyone to live for them, too. I've seen him pull whole teams into the office for weekends, reworking presentations from the ground up. So when Maya said she was staying late because Richard wanted changes, it made sense. It sounded like typical Sentinel Holdings. But then, little things started adding up. For one, Maya had this new habit of keeping her phone face down on the table whenever we were together. I know, it sounds trivial, but it was strange. Before, she'd leave her phone anywhere. Sometimes, if she got a text while she was cooking, she'd even ask me to check it for her. But now, she kept it close, always within reach, always turned over. I tried not to think much of it, but every time it buzzed, she'd get this quick, panicked look, then go silent. And there was something else. When I'd ask her about these late nights, she'd get defensive, almost impatient. "It's just work stuff, Eric," she'd say, like I was being unreasonable for even asking. She'd brush it off with, "It's the Madison Project, and Richard's really leaning on me for this one." But there was a vibe, a kind of tension she couldn't quite hide. The worst part was, I'd catch her doing things that didn't add up. Like the night I offered to bring her dinner at the office since she was staying late. She quickly shot down the idea, saying they were too busy and that it'd be a distraction. Her excuse made sense, but it felt wrong. I started wondering if it was more than just work. But then I'd tell myself I was being paranoid, that she was just stressed. We were both under a lot of pressure, after all. Still, those doubts kept coming back. Maybe it sounds crazy, but it started gnawing at me. That sense of unease didn't go away, it just got stronger every time I saw her look at her phone or dodge my questions. The first real shocker came one Friday night. Maya had popped by my desk late in the afternoon, looking all packed up and ready to head out. She mentioned she was going home early and then going to dinner with some colleagues from her team. "You'll be stuck here all night with that report anyway," she teased, flashing me a quick smile. I figured it was just a casual night for her, maybe a bit of team bonding over drinks. I didn't think twice about it. Sentinel's building after hours is a strange place, quiet, dimly lit, and empty enough that even the faint hum of the fluorescent lights can get under your skin. As the hours passed and the building grew emptier, I decided to take a quick walk down the hall to clear my head and stretch a little before tackling the last part of the report. The silence was eerie, almost too thick. But as I neared Richard's office, something stopped me cold. It was Maya's laugh, a sound I'd recognize anywhere. But it wasn't the casual laugh she'd share at home, or even the polite laugh she'd use with colleagues. No, this laugh was different, softer, and almost flirtatious. It felt out of place, especially in Richard's office, especially at this hour. My stomach twisted as I slowed down, trying to convince myself I was imagining things, hoping it was just a trick of the late-night quiet. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe they'd met up after dinner to review something urgent. Maybe I was just reading too much into it. But as I turned to go back to my desk, her laugh kept replaying in my head, like a loop I couldn't turn off. It reminded me of how she used to laugh with me, back when we were first dating, full of warmth and that special kind of intimacy. On the drive home, I couldn't shake it. I barely remember the drive itself, I was too busy replaying that moment over and over. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the late night and stress were getting to me. But as I lay in bed, my mind wouldn't let it go. That laugh, it just felt wrong. The whole weekend, that feeling stuck with me. Whether I was watching TV or making coffee, the memory would hit me, that odd tone in her voice haunting me. I kept asking myself if there was something I was missing. Had I overlooked signs right in front of me? The doubt settled in slowly, filling up every corner of my mind until I couldn't ignore it anymore. For the first time, I started to wonder if Maya was hiding something from me, something she didn't want me to find out. The more I noticed, the more my gut kept warning me that something was off. Every time I'd bring up her job or mention Richard, Maya would either deflect with a quick "it's just work," or act like I was making a big deal out of nothing. She'd say things like, "Eric, you know how he is, he's demanding, but it's just business." Or she'd make a joke, trying to wave off my questions. The way she dodged around it made me feel like I was prying, and honestly, I started wondering if maybe I was overreacting. I mean, what did I have? A laugh, some late nights, a phone face down on the table. None of it added up to much, but it kept bugging me all the same. Then one day at the office, things took a turn. I was grabbing coffee in the break room when a coworker casually mentioned they'd seen Maya and Richard leaving together the night before. They said it in that offhand way, like they didn't think twice about it, but for me, it was like someone had thrown a switch. All I could think was, why were they leaving together? Richard and Maya aren't exactly best friends. Their relationship is strictly professional, or at least it's supposed to be. My mind went in 1,000 different directions, and none of them felt good. That night, I decided to try a different approach. When Maya came home, I didn't mention what I'd heard. Instead, I just asked her about her day, hoping she'd offer something, anything, that would ease my mind. She launched into her usual routine, talking about a client meeting and a few things she'd handled on her own, but no mention of Richard at all. She just breezed through it, like it was an ordinary day. I tried to convince myself it was fine, that maybe they'd just left at the same time. But that nagging feeling kept growing. It was like a slow burn, this constant sense that something was wrong, but I couldn't quite pin it down. I wanted to trust her, she was my wife, after all. But with every small evasion, every dismissive answer, that trust was starting to wear thin. After that, I started paying close attention to everything Maya did. Every little detail felt like it mattered. If she'd casually mention a late night at the office with Richard, my mind would start spiraling, wondering if there was more to it. I'd watch her reactions closely, searching for some hint of guilt, some sign that would either confirm or dissolve my suspicions. But she was good at keeping things together, so I decided I had to take things a step further if I was ever going to find out the truth. One night, after she said she'd be staying late with Richard yet again, I decided to do something I'd never imagined myself doing. I followed her. As I parked across from Sentinel, I felt ridiculous, like some kind of spy in a bad movie. I kept asking myself, what am I even doing? I wanted to trust her, to just go home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to see for myself. If there was nothing, I'd finally be able to let it go. Around 9 p.m., I saw them. Richard came out first, and then Maya, right on his heels. They looked so at ease, laughing as they walked side by side. I felt my stomach twist as I watched them cross the street together and enter a small cafe nearby, the kind of cozy spot we used to go to on our own dates. They slipped into a corner booth, leaning in close like they shared some private joke. Watching them, my heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. A part of me wanted to march in there, make a scene, demand an explanation in front of everyone. I actually gripped the door handle, ready to storm in, but just then, my phone rang. I glanced down, and it was work, an emergency that I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I wanted to. My jaw clenched, and I felt torn in two. I had no choice but to take the call, to step away just when I was on the verge of finally knowing. By the time I handled the work issue and raced back to the cafe, they were gone. I drove home, feeling hollow, angry, and frustrated beyond words. My mind was spinning with what I'd just seen, and I had no idea what I'd say to her. But when I got there, she was already home, in sweats, looking exhausted as if she'd just had the longest day at the office. She looked up with that same familiar expression, her face so neutral, so normal. It was like nothing had happened. I stood there, staring at her, waiting for some flicker of guilt, but she just smiled and asked how my day was. My throat felt tight, and I could barely respond. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. I needed more than just one late-night cafe visit and a laugh that I could have misread. But inside, my heart was already breaking, piece by piece. The next weekend, Maya dropped a new piece of news on me, casual as anything. She'd be heading to a weekend retreat with Richard to strategize for the Madison project. She talked about it as if it were just another work obligation, barely making eye contact. She said Richard wanted her and a few others to get out of the office, clear their heads, and focus. It'll be a lot of work, honestly, she added, as if that somehow made it sound less suspicious. But something in her tone didn't sit right with me. I tried to play it cool, though my stomach was already churning. I smiled and said, "Hey, maybe I'll drive up and join you for a night. It'll be a nice surprise." The second those words left my mouth, I saw it, a flicker of something on her face, just a split-second hesitation. Her smile froze. Then she laughed awkwardly and said, "Oh, Eric, it's just for the core team. You'd be bored out of your mind. We'll probably be going over marketing pitches and data the whole time." She tried to brush it off, but her words felt too quick, too rehearsed. That small reaction made my stomach drop. I could feel the trust between us fraying, but I tried to stay calm, forcing a smile and letting her believe I'd bought her story. She left that Friday morning, bags packed and her phone practically glued to her hand. Watching her leave, I felt this intense mix of anger and helplessness, knowing she might be lying to me but having nothing solid to confront her with. I was sick of the guessing game, of these endless nights of wondering. I had to know. That's why I got desperate enough to do something I never thought I'd do. I set up a tracking app on her phone. I figured, if she was really going to a retreat with her team, I'd see her location upstate at the resort she'd mentioned. And if she wasn't, well, then I'd have the truth staring back at me. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to know. If I was wrong, I'd delete the app and try to move on. But if I was right, I had to be ready. For the first few hours, everything seemed fine. The app showed her location on the highway, heading out of the city, just like she'd said. I was almost starting to feel foolish for doubting her. But then, right as she'd supposedly reached the resort, the tracking suddenly stopped. The app just went blank. I kept refreshing, but nothing, just an error message saying the phone was offline. At first, I thought it was a glitch, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Maya had turned it off. I felt a chill run through me as I realized that not only was she hiding something, but she also likely knew I was trying to keep an eye on her. It was a bitter pill to swallow, that my own wife was playing this game, evading me like I was the enemy. I spent the rest of that weekend in a haze, feeling trapped and blindsided. Every time I tried to focus on something else, my mind would drift back to that blank tracker screen, that gut feeling that Maya was somewhere she didn't want me to know about. At this point, I'd had enough. I felt like I was unraveling with all the late nights, the secrecy, the careful dodges she used whenever I brought up work. If she was hiding something, I needed to see it with my own eyes or hear it with my own ears. So, I decided to set a trap at home. I told her I'd be working late that Friday, leaving her thinking she'd have the house to herself. That evening, I came home early and carefully set up the place to look like I'd just stepped out for a minute. I left my laptop open on the dining table, a few scattered papers, a pen, even my half-full coffee cup still warm, as if I'd just walked into another room. I wanted her to feel secure, to think she was truly alone. Then I slipped upstairs, crouching by the stairwell where I could hear everything. My heart was racing as I hid, listening to every creak and shuffle, hoping for some kind of clue. It felt strange and unsettling, crouching there in my own home, but I was past the point of feeling guilty. I needed to know what was going on. I needed to confirm if the woman I'd trusted all these years was someone I couldn't even recognize anymore. Every second felt like an hour as I waited, barely breathing, listening for the sound of her key in the door. Finally, I heard the lock turn, the faint sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She entered the house and paused, probably taking in a setup. She must have believed I was still out, because after a few seconds, I heard her voice, low and cautious. She was on the phone. I couldn't make out much at first, just hushed murmurs. But as she moved further into the room, I caught a few words, fragments that hit me like a punch to the gut. One of those words was Richard. My whole body tensed. My mind was racing, hanging on every word, trying to catch even the slightest hint of what she was saying. The conversation was muffled, like she was pressing the phone close to her mouth. "No, I think he'll be working late," I heard her say, followed by another pause. Then she said something about keeping things simple, but her voice dropped even lower, and I couldn't catch the rest. It was like she was intentionally whispering, careful not to let her words carry. But then, as if she sensed something, she went silent. I held my breath, my pulse pounding in my ears. There was a long pause, and I felt the tension in the air shift. Slowly, I peeked around the corner to see her standing in the kitchen, holding her phone tightly. She looked around, her eyes sweeping over the room with this look of suspicion, like she knew someone was nearby. Without another word, she ended the call, slipped her phone into her bag, and started moving around the kitchen like she'd just come home, opening cabinets, pulling out a glass, acting like she was about to make herself a drink. I stood there, frozen, realizing she'd sensed me somehow. I wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation right then, but I forced myself to stay calm. I walked downstairs casually, pretending like I'd just returned, saying something like, "Oh, hey, didn't expect you back so soon." She looked up, startled, a quick flash of guilt crossing her face before she covered it with a strained smile. "Yeah, I just wrapped up and thought I'd head home," she said, all too casually. I played along, but inside, I was boiling. I knew she'd been on the phone with him, with Richard. And she knew I was close to catching her. But in that moment, it felt like we were both trapped in this twisted game, each of us waiting for the other to make the next move. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I had something she couldn't deny. But that night, as we sat in the same room, pretending everything was fine, I felt the weight of everything slipping out of control. By then, I was completely at my wit's end. The late nights, the secrecy, the defensiveness, it was eating me alive. My thoughts were a constant loop of questions and doubts that I couldn't shut off, no matter how hard I tried. I felt like I was losing my grip, caught in this spiral of confusion and anger. Every day, I woke up feeling more exhausted than the day before, the kind of exhaustion that goes beyond just lack of sleep. It was like the life was draining out of me, bit by bit, with every suspicion, every half-truth, and every evasion from Maya. I'd been trying to figure it out on my own for weeks, watching our movements, asking carefully phrased questions, even setting up little tests. But nothing was clear, nothing was definite, and I felt like I was losing my sanity. I was so desperate for answers that I finally did something I'd once sworn I'd never do. I hired a private investigator. Part of me hated myself for it. I'd always believed that if there was an issue in our marriage, we'd talk it out directly, work through it like adults. But now, it was like the ground had shifted beneath me, and I didn't know who to trust or where to turn. The investigator was discreet, a professional who promised he'd be careful. I told him everything, every detail that had been haunting me for months. The late nights, the canceled plans, the weird behavior. He just nodded, calm and steady, and promised he'd get to the bottom of it. It felt wrong, but I was in too deep to stop. I needed the truth, whatever it was, so I could finally feel like I had some control over my life again. A week later, the PI came back with a report. Nothing too conclusive, just a sighting, Maya and Richard having lunch together across town, well out of the area she'd told me she'd be in. It shouldn't have been enough to confirm anything, but it felt like confirmation all the same. Why was she meeting him across town, away from work, away from anywhere we'd usually go? It made my skin crawl just thinking about it. I told the investigator to dig deeper, to keep following her, but that same evening, something unexpected happened. My phone rang, a call from a blocked number. I thought about ignoring it, but something told me to pick up. I answered, and a deep, unfamiliar voice on the other end said, "Stop digging if you know what's good for you." The voice was calm, flat, almost cold. There was no anger or threat in it, just this eerie, unsettling certainty. That call shook me to my core. I stood there holding the phone, feeling like the ground had dropped out from under me. My heart was pounding, and I could feel this cold sweat breaking out along my back. For a few seconds, I was frozen, just staring into space, replaying those words over and over. Stop digging if you know what's good for you. It was the kind of thing you hear in movies or crime shows, not in real life, not in my life. I suddenly realized that I might be dealing with something way out of my control. This wasn't just about losing my marriage anymore, it felt like I was caught up in something darker, something bigger than me. I had no idea who that caller was or how they'd even known I'd hired someone to investigate, but they knew. And somehow, that knowledge was even scarier than the thought of Maya's betrayal. It made everything feel more dangerous, more twisted. I wasn't just losing my wife, I was losing my sense of safety, my sense of stability. That night, I sat alone in the dark, my mind spinning. I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was slipping through my fingers, that this thing had taken on a life of its own. The idea that there was someone out there watching, someone who wanted me to stop, made it feel like I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. After trying every approach I could think of, I felt like I'd reached the end of the line. I'd asked, confronted, hinted, waited, doing everything short of outright accusing Maya of cheating. And every time, she'd given me deflections or excuses, leaving me with more questions than answers. But I knew that if she really was hiding something, the only way to see it was to get completely out of her sight. I had one last, drastic plan. I arranged for my monitoring department to spend a week at one of our company's facilities upstate. I framed it as a unique opportunity for the team to see their work applied firsthand, on the ground. Management approved the proposal quickly, and the entire team was set to leave early the next morning. But I'd made arrangements so that everyone except me would go. That way, Maya would think I was gone too, and I'd finally see what she was up to without her knowing. That evening, I parked my car a few streets away from our apartment, watching the front door from a distance. My hands were clammy, gripping the steering wheel, and my heart was pounding so loudly I could feel it in my ears. A part of me hoped this was all a mistake, that I'd see her go about a normal evening and realize I'd been overthinking everything. But as the city lights started casting long shadows on the street, I saw her walk out of our building, and I knew I was about to get my answer. She was dressed up, her hair done, wearing a sleek black dress that I hadn't seen in a long time, paired with heels I thought she'd retired. She looked beautiful. Radiant, almost. But it wasn't for me. It was the kind of effort you put in for someone new, someone who makes your heart race. My stomach dropped, and a cold anger rose inside me as I watched her hail a cab, completely unaware of my presence. I started the engine, following from a safe distance, feeling my pulse quicken with each turn. Her cab pulled up to one of the upscale hotels downtown, the kind of place we'd talked about staying at for a special occasion. It was not the type of place you go to for a casual night out with colleagues. I watched her step out, looking around briefly, then walk inside. Moments later, Richard entered the lobby, dressed in a way that suggested he'd been looking forward to this night. He walked up to her, his hand resting on her arm as they exchanged a few quiet words, both of them smiling. I didn't need to hear anything to know what was going on. I could see it in their faces, in the ease of their body language. They walked together to the check-in desk. I watched as the receptionist handed them a key card, as they made their way to the elevator. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My worst suspicions weren't just suspicions anymore, they were fact. The woman I'd shared my life with, the man I'd respected as my boss, both of them were together, and here I was, watching my life unravel through a windshield. I sat there, staring at the hotel's entrance, unable to move. I felt hollow, as though someone had punched a hole straight through my chest and left me there, empty. The memories, the trust we'd built, all of it felt shattered. I wanted to believe this was a mistake, some terrible misunderstanding. But the truth was staring right back at me. I stayed parked there for hours, hoping to numb myself to the pain, to somehow accept it. But it was real, and there was no escaping it. They were together, and I was left alone, watching my life collapse around me. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, laughing, touching, walking into that hotel as if they didn't have a care in the world. The betrayal sat heavy in my chest, each memory replaying like a cruel movie that wouldn't turn off. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange combination of rage and numbness. I knew what I had to do, and by morning, I had made up my mind. This wasn't a marriage anymore, it was a lie. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The next day, I went straight to a lawyer. I didn't want to waste another second questioning myself or hoping for explanations. It was time to move on, time to take control of my life again. The lawyer listened to my story, calm and sympathetic, nodding as he took notes. When he asked if I'd confronted her, I told him, no, not yet. But I will. He looked at me and said, it's important you stay calm, Eric. Get your answers, but don't let her manipulate the conversation. When I finally got home, Maya was there, scrolling through her phone on the couch as if nothing was wrong. Seeing her there, acting so casual, made my blood boil. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. She looked up, sensing something in my expression, and asked, "Eric, what's wrong?" I didn't sugarcoat it. "I know, Maya," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I know about you and Richard. I know about the hotel. I saw everything." Her face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. She opened her mouth, then closed it, scrambling for words. What are you talking about?" she stammered, trying to laugh it off, but the nervousness in her voice gave her away. "Are you actually accusing me of something?" "Eric, that's ridiculous." "I'm not accusing you, Maya," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I followed you. I saw you meet him at the hotel, saw you check in together. Don't insult me by pretending it didn't happen. I know the truth." Her expression shifted, a flash of anger crossing her face as she realized the lie wasn't going to work. "So, what, you're spying on me now? That's real classy, Eric. I can't believe you would stoop so low." "Don't turn this around on me," I snapped, feeling the anger I'd been holding back all night finally break through. "I wouldn't have had to do any of this if you'd just been honest with me. But you lied. Over and over, you lied to my face, and for what? For him?" She crossed her arms, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "And what do you expect, Eric? You've been distant for months. It's like you care more about work than you do about us. Maybe if you paid a little more attention, you would have seen this coming." That hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're blaming me? You're seriously trying to pin this on me? After everything, you're going to stand there and say it's my fault?" Her voice got louder, angrier, as if trying to drown out my words. "I'm just saying it takes two, Eric. You think I wanted things to end up like this? I've been miserable, feeling ignored, like I'm just some part of your routine. Richard actually noticed me, listened to me. Maybe if you'd done the same, we wouldn't be here." I felt a surge of rage, mixed with a crushing sense of betrayal. Her words were like a knife, twisting deeper with every excuse, every attempt to justify what she'd done. I took a step back, needing to keep some distance so I didn't say something I'd regret. "You know what?" I said, my voice cold, final. "I don't care about your excuses anymore, Maya. I trusted you. I gave everything to this marriage, and this is how you repay me? By sneaking around, by lying to my face, and now blaming me for it?" I shook my head, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're done. I'm filing for divorce." Her face changed then, her anger fading, replaced by a look of desperation. "Eric, wait. Don't do this. Let's talk about it, please. We can work through this. I made a mistake, okay? I messed up, but we can fix this." But I was done. Her plea sounded empty, like an afterthought. The damage was already done, and no amount of talking could undo the betrayal. "It's too late for that, Maya. I'm not going to pretend everything's okay just because you want to keep up appearances. I deserve better than this." She started crying, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled away. I could see the regret in her eyes, but it wasn't enough. Not after everything she'd put me through. "Eric, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't throw it all away." I looked at her one last time, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. "I'm not the one who threw it away, Maya. You did." And with that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, the weight of her choices finally catching up with her. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of freedom, like I'd finally broken free from the lies and the hurt. It wasn't the ending I'd ever wanted, but it was the one I needed. As I walked away, I knew there was no going back. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to move on. About a week after I confronted Maya, I was summoned to Richard's office. I felt a wave of anger just seeing his name on the caller ID, but I kept my voice calm, playing along, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. I couldn't believe he actually had the nerve to call me in. After everything, I had thought he might at least avoid me out of shame, but apparently, shame wasn't something Richard dealt with. When I walked in, he was sitting behind his desk, looking far too comfortable. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Instead, he leaned back, folded his hands, and said, "Eric, I think we need to have a straightforward conversation." He smiled, that smug look of his even more infuriating now that I knew what was going on behind the scenes. He didn't deny a thing. Didn't even try. Instead, he jumped straight to his so-called solution. "Look, I know the situation with Maya has been difficult," he said, like he was acknowledging some trivial misunderstanding rather than the complete betrayal of my trust. "But you're a valuable asset here, Eric. We both know that. And I'd hate for this situation to affect your career." He paused, giving me a calculating look before leaning forward. "In fact, I think you're due for a promotion." A promotion? I could hardly believe what I was hearing. He was trying to bribe me into silence, as if my life was just another deal to negotiate. "I'm thinking Executive Director of Technical Operations," he continued, "as if you were doing me a favor. It'd come with a significant raise and some added perks. I think it's fair compensation, considering the circumstances." He smiled that smug smile, so sure of himself. I wanted to knock that look right off his face, but I kept my expression neutral. I could feel the rage simmering just below the surface, but I couldn't let him see that. Instead, I nodded slowly, pretending to consider it. "A promotion," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "That's generous of you, Richard." I watched his face closely, letting him think he'd won, that he'd managed to buy my silence with a shiny new title and a paycheck. But I already had other plans. I'd spent that week carefully documenting everything, every text, every piece of evidence I could gather, including the receipts from that hotel downtown. I even saved screenshots of Maya's messages and calls to him. And now, Richard had given me something even more valuable, his attempt to bribe me into keeping my mouth shut. This wasn't just a personal betrayal anymore, it was a blatant abuse of power. A few days later, he called me back in, pushing a little harder this time. He must have sensed I wasn't entirely convinced. "I'm just trying to look out for you, Eric," he said, his tone smooth and practiced. "We don't need any messiness here. You take the promotion, you keep your position secure, and we can put all of this behind us." That's when I laid it all out on the table. I pulled out the folder I'd been building, filled with every incriminating piece of evidence I'd gathered. I set it down on his desk, watching as the smug look started to fade from his face. "You think you can just bribe me into silence, Richard?" I asked, my voice steady. "You think I'd let you destroy my marriage, humiliate me, and then walk away as if nothing happened?" He reached for the folder, flipping through it, his face growing paler with each page. He realized exactly how much I had: texts, photos, timestamps, even the call records. Everything he'd done to manipulate and deceive was laid out in black and white. "If you try to mess with my career, if you even think about retaliating, this," I tapped the folder, "goes straight to HR. And if that doesn't get their attention, I'm sure the media would love to see what's going on behind closed doors at Sentinel." His hands were trembling slightly as he set the folder back down, his eyes locked on mine. The confidence, the smugness, it was all gone, replaced by a look of pure fear. He knew I had him. "Eric," he started, his voice lower, almost pleading. "Let's be reasonable here. This doesn't have to escalate. We're both professionals." "Exactly," I replied coldly. "So act like one, and let's keep it that way." I turned and walked out, leaving him sitting there, his entire plan unraveling before his eyes. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a sense of power, a sense of control. He'd underestimated me, thought he could buy me off with a promotion and an empty promise, but now he knew exactly who he was dealing with. The divorce happened faster than I expected. Maya and I barely exchanged words after that final confrontation. She tried once or twice to apologize, leaving me texts and voicemails saying, "Let's at least talk," but there was nothing left to say. I was done with her excuses, with all the empty words and false promises. It was clear to both of us that there was no salvaging anything, no working through a betrayal that deep. So, we went through the motions, signed the papers, and just like that, our nearly 9 years together were over. It was strange how quiet the apartment felt afterward. When I was there alone, packing up my things, it felt like a different place, like it belonged to someone else entirely. Every corner, every little detail held memories that now felt like ghosts haunting me, familiar places that had turned cold and hollow. I couldn't stay there. Everything in Chicago reminded me of them, of the lies and betrayal that had unraveled everything I thought I knew. The city had once been a place full of energy and possibility, but now it was filled with reminders of a life I could no longer stand to look at. It felt like the walls themselves were whispering of what I'd lost. I needed out. So, when the chance came to transfer to a new position in another city, I took it without a second thought. Moving wasn't easy. Starting over at a new job, finding a new place to live, trying to rebuild my life from the ground up, it was exhausting in a way that went beyond physical effort. Some days, I'd look around at the boxes, the unfamiliar streets, and wonder if I'd ever feel settled again. But I kept going because there was something driving me forward that I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of freedom, a sense that I was finally in control of my own life. It was odd, really. I'd lost my marriage, my home, and a job I'd invested years into, but somehow, I felt lighter. Free. That sense of relief didn't come all at once, but it grew little by little, day by day. I started feeling less like the man who'd been betrayed and more like someone who'd been given a second chance. It was tough, sure, but I was learning to appreciate the simplicity of things again. Waking up without the weight of suspicion, going to bed without that constant gnawing doubt, it was worth everything I'd gone through. I was free from the lies, free from all the constant second-guessing. And as hard as it was to let go of the life I'd built, I realized that freedom was worth it. In the quiet moments, I still found myself looking back sometimes, wondering how it all went wrong. But as time passed, those memories felt more distant, like scenes from someone else's life. The anger, the pain, they were still there, but they had started to fade, replaced by a kind of calm acceptance. Starting over hadn't been what I'd planned, but it was exactly what I needed. And as I looked out over the skyline of my new city, I knew that I was ready for whatever came next, truly free for the first time in a long, long time. Even now, I still find myself looking back to those days, sometimes in the quiet moments of the evening or during a long drive. The memories drift in, uninvited, like waves that refuse to stay down. I'll think about Maya, about the life we shared, and wonder how I missed all the signs. Were they always there, quietly nudging me, or was I simply too blind, too trusting to see them? It haunts me sometimes, the idea that the person I loved, the person I trusted above all, had been living a double life right in front of me. I ask myself if I ever really knew her at all or if I had just seen what I wanted to see. Was she always someone capable of such deception, or did we both change somewhere along the way? There are nights when those questions creep in, but I've come to accept that I may never have the answers. It's strange, trying to find closure in something that will forever be a mystery. But I've learned to make peace with it. Life doesn't always give you clean endings or the satisfaction of understanding everything. Sometimes, you're left with loose ends and unanswered questions, and that has to be enough. What I do know now is that there's something powerful about trusting yourself. I'd spent so much time ignoring my instincts, doubting my own perceptions, dismissing that little voice in my head. And I paid the price for it. Now, I'll never let that happen again. I've learned to listen to myself, to trust my gut, even if it tells me things I don't want to hear. That kind of self-trust is hard won, and I hold on to it like a lifeline. But more than anything, I've come to see the experience as something that reshaped me, something that ultimately set me free. Maya's betrayal shattered me, yes, but it also stripped away all the illusions, all the false comfort I had wrapped myself in. Losing her, and losing the life we'd built, forced me to face myself in ways I never had before. It was painful and brutal, but it was also a kind of rebirth. I was forced to rebuild myself from the ground up, and I became stronger for it. I think that's what healing really looks like, letting go of the need for answers, for closure, and learning to live with the scars. I still have moments when it stings, when I think of everything that could have been. But now, those thoughts don't hold me back. They're reminders of how far I've come, of how much I've grown. They remind me of a chapter that's closed, and each time I look back, I find myself grateful that I came through it, grateful for the strength I never knew I had. So here I am, moving forward, a different man than I was before, maybe a little scarred, maybe a little cautious. But I'm stronger, wiser, and for the first time, fully grounded in who I am. I know I'll never ignore my instincts again, and I'll never settle for anything less than what I deserve. And in the end, that's the real freedom, the freedom to live a life that's honest, with people I can trust, starting with myself.